Hey everyone, this is Derlene Hirtz with You Empowered Services, studying the science of success and mindset for the last 8 years. And I am so excited to introduce you today to the real James Bond. And I really, in transparency, I wanted to meet James Bond simply because of his name. And I heard such great things about him. And today we're going to tell you what happens in the real life of the real James Bond, because I'm guessing it's not how it plays out in the music, right, James?
No, not at all.
So James is a veteran with the U.S. Army. He was airborne, which is another love of mine. As you may or may not know, my son's in the Army, and so we had that connectedness right away. I think we spent about an hour on that alone when we talked the first time. And then he's gone to fire school, he's gone to EMT school. His focus today is on taking steps on health and wellness, which he'll share with us, more meaningful relationships in his life, a very holistic approach to life and business. All of those are where his journey has brought him to right now to focus on where he is now. So James, let's just dig right in. Since I first met James, things are a little different for him right now. And we decided that this is going to be a real and raw conversation today about what it's like to be in business, to be an entrepreneur, to be a dad, a veteran, all the things that make us an unstoppable expert. So let me start with that question, James. Where do you see yourself as an unstoppable expert?
Wow. I guess to answer that humbly and honestly is to nowhere. But an unstoppable force. As a dad, and really trying to find. I don't know. Sometimes I think the balance word is used a little too much, but finding that right chemistry when it comes to being a dad, being in the business world, and taking care of your body. You mentioned that's a huge focus of mine. It's trying to find that right mix, because it's different for every person. So yeah, I more of an unstoppable force in that regard.
I really love unstoppable force. I love that way better than an unstoppable expert. So maybe I should change the podcast name. Excellent. And I see that. And one of the things that you just talked about was balance. And I agree with you. Is it really even possible to balance our life, our kids, our relationships with work, all the things? One of the things that I focus on is creating harmony with it. Because reality is, I always think about my sister and I used to do that teeter-totter, right, when we were kids. And it lasted for like a half a second. And then it was like, again. And when you think about it in terms of harmonizing, so sometimes your work life is going to take over. Sometimes your dad life is going to take over. Sometimes your relationship is going to take over. But the goal is to always create harmony around that. And that, for me, is much more doable than trying to find that balance, right? Would that be fair?
Sure. No, I think that's so true. And part of learning is making those micro adjustments, right? I think some of the best leaders and certainly some of the best leaders in my life have kind of have all had that in common. Hey, when you are done with the day and you take a little bit of time to reflect on it, what are the things, don't look at everything first that you did wrong. Definitely focus on some of the things, your wins for the day. And because we are our own worst enemies. It doesn't take much for us to figure out what we did wrong, where we failed, where we screwed up, or what have you. But really focus on what you did well, and then once you've got that more positive mindset, then go back and say, all right, what could I improve upon? And for me, so often, I have 4 kids, so often the days that I have them, I do sit back and I think, all right, what could I have improved upon? Could have been more intentional. It's difficult doing that when you have 4, especially being intentional with all 4 of them. Takes a little bit more planning, takes a little bit more practice. The age variation makes it a challenge. but being more intentional is one of those things that I constantly look at, and I'm like, okay, how can I be more intentional with my 10-year-old? Because her conversations and her interests are wildly different from, my soon to be 2-year-old. And even, I mean, even the differences between my 10 and 7-year-old, I mean, and they are nearly inseparable, but still, like, their personalities are so different, their interests are so different. Even though they can play off of each other and enjoy them, they're still just, wildly different. My 7-year-old wants to go run around a whole heck of a lot more than my 10-year-old. And so, finding those little things that you can improve upon and making micro adjustments just to be a little bit better than you were the day before, I think is really the better focus. And that's something that I absolutely try to think about.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I've got identical twin granddaughters. And I watch them and I see how incredibly different they are. They are literally 7 seconds apart.
Oof.
And to know that these personalities are so unique and different, right? It's
Mhm.
same womb, 7 seconds.
Right.
And it's like they're my greatest metaphor to talk about this, because they're just both so incredibly different with different personalities, and it's such a great design for that to happen. I just think that's
Oh
amazing.
yeah,
So
for
we were
sure.
talking earlier about, before we got on recording, we were talking about your life in the Army and the challenges that it presented to you and how you overcame them, and then kind of dumped back into something sort of similar here very recently.
Right.
Share that with
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, anytime you join the military, anytime you join any new organization, you're always going to have challenges. And I think that's one of the cool things about life. But in particular, one of the things that really stood out and really changed the course of the rest of my life, um, was I had a couple of injuries that had greatly affected me and were ultimately the reasons as to why I got out. I had not broken my back, but severely shifted and damaged it, my lower back, from airborne operations. And then I had a couple of concussions too. And both of them were wildly interesting, especially now that I reflect on it. I mean, in the middle of it, it's, when you're injured, and it's borderline debilitating, where it changes your everyday life. I mean, one of the cool things about being a human is the gradual changes that we can make. But when it's, drastic changes, you approach it with a lot of fear and skepticism, and sometimes, and oftentimes, probably the worst mindset ever, right? Like, I could walk. It was incredibly painful. I had numbness in places that, or a numbness in my feet and legs for longer than what was ever comfortable, and for longer than I was, like, legitimately thinking it's going to come back. It was for months at a time that I had this numbness, and I tried lots of different things, from physical therapy to a it's called an RFA procedure, and it's where they try to look for the nerves, numb them, and then eventually burn them off to kind of help relieve the pain and help you get back to a normal life. All of which was unsuccessful. Oddly enough, the most beneficial treatment that I got was on a traction table, and that's where they kind of like medieval torture. They pull you. That was the best thing that I had ever experienced, and brought the most relief. But I couldn't do it consistently, so that was a pain. But when I tried all of this. This happened in July, and I want to say about 2 weeks later or so, we got deployment orders. And I was an infantry guy, so not many people join the infantry and don't want to deploy. I definitely wanted to. I wanted to go over to Iraq, and that's where we were going. I couldn't do it, and the concussion was part of it. That really made it a challenge too. But the physical side of, hey, I can't run without feeling like my legs are noodles. I I could move everything, but I couldn't feel it. And it was incredibly odd. And so that whole time, going through, that was July. We didn't deploy, or the unit didn't leave until late January, I think early February. I spent most of that time, or all of that time, really going through different procedures, trying different treatments, all of which were unsuccessful. And so, like, there's the added stress of the environment that you're in. You're around a bunch of generally, alphas and betas, and so they're trying to push you to do all of these different things. You're wanting to do it. You have that desire to compete, and serve, and your body is telling you no. And so, like, from a mental health perspective, that was incredibly difficult. It is such a slow process. And so, that was in 2016. I ended up getting, staying in there for another year, helping everybody kind of go out and deploy and then come back. And then that was right about the time that I got out. So it was, medically discharged, for these injuries, and which was really difficult because when I joined, I had the desire to go into special operations. I had a contract to go be a ranger, and I missed out on that opportunity for a completely different reason, but not injury related. So there's a whole lot of regret. There's a whole lot of self-sabotage that went into this. Like, oh man, if I would have just done these things differently, or if I wouldn't have made this decision, quit being such a bitch, and I'm like, you talk like that to yourself, and you listen to other people are telling you the same thing. Don't be such a bitch. Suck it up. Dude, I'm struggling to walk here. Like, I don't know I don't know when my foot hits the ground other than when my hip tells me it does, and so I'm like, okay. And I'd watched other people go through and get these same treatments and come out just fine. And so it made me scratch my head a lot. Ultimately it came down to, hey, you can put rods in your back or you can get out. And I was like, huh. And I had the sense enough to go talk to somebody else and get a second opinion. Sent them all the same stuff, and they're like, don't let the Army put rods in your back. Just get out. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a better idea. So I ended up making that decision. But and I got out in late 2017, but I didn't get right to where the pain in my back was, no longer something that I would wake up and be like, oh, okay, I feel it. This sucks. It took 3 years for me to get to a point where I could wake up and go, oh wow, this isn't bothering me any like it used to. It's the constant pain is much more manageable, if any, at this point. I have good days and bad days, but the change of pace, the change of lifestyle definitely helps. But then it's being more intentional with what you do from a health and wellness perspective, and that, depending on where you are in life or depending on what you're doing in life, sometimes those, how intentional can you be about your health and wellness, those decisions can be made for you, and with little input. And that's so unfortunate, especially in such a risky career field like the military,
Right.
where that's a huge emphasis to begin with. So yeah, that was a really challenging time for sure.
Yeah. You said something that I want to bring up because it's one of the things that I deal with so much in my business. Actually, it's probably the reason I got into my business. And it's those voices in the head, otherwise known as the
Yeah.
itty bitty shitty committee or the
Right.
saboteurs.
Right.
People pretty much chuckle over itty bitty shitty committee. However, that's a pretty good description, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
they're firing off one after another. And until we learn to answer them. And the other thing that you said is that people were saying that too to you. And, in my experience, especially with so many of the people whose lives I've worked with, when they buy into, it's not that people say that to you, because that gets to be that's their story and their journey. It's that we buy into what they're saying. And then that just joins
Yep.
the itty bitty shitty committee. And then it's all over, right? And so what is the one thing that you would say in terms of mindset shift? What is the one thing that you think that was the turning point for you?
I would say honestly, January of 2020 was a huge overall life and mental shift. A number of different events took place in the year of 2020. Most notably for everyone was the pandemic, right? And the first, good Lord, the first 6 months of that month were probably some of the most challenging I had probably ever experienced. And it first started with in December of 19. The office that I was working at the time had decided, hey, we're gonna do a Biggest Loser competition, because everybody was talking about, hey, what are some goals that we're gonna try to accomplish, and the office was doing really great in setting up, hey, here's what we want to accomplish the next year. And so we even, a number of us had talked about, oh, what's a personal goal, and a bunch of us had said, oh, losing weight and getting in better shape, and a lot of people push for that, and but it got real. The small office that I was working at, they're like, hey, let's do a Biggest Loser competition, and I was like, at the time I was the heaviest I had ever been. I was at 235 pounds, and I was not happy with my self-image. I would make references to, I took a picture with my daughter. She had woken me up on a weekend, and I took a picture with my daughter, and I had this, not just a double chin, but a triple chin look. And it reminded me, because the smile was close. I didn't have the hair, but the smile, everything reminded me of Ryan Reynolds in the movie in the mid 2000s called Just Friends, when he goes from a huge kid in high school to looking like the supermodel that Ryan Reynolds is, and so I remember taking that picture and having this conversation with the office about us setting this up, and I remember just looking at that picture again, and I still have it to this day, because I use that as like a don't get back to that, because that was like December of 19 was, for all intents and purposes, probably one of the worst months I'd ever experienced in my life. And so January 1st is, when we kicked this thing off, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And now when I tell people the story of what I did, because I lost 35 pounds in 35 days, and most people are like, yeah, exactly. They're like, whoa, what did you do? Coach me. And I'm like, no, don't do what I did. And the biggest reason for that is because there are safer ways to do it. There are more healthy ways to do it. But I'm a competitor. So many instances in my life, it's been a pendulum, right? And if you've never read the book, I highly recommend it. I can't think of the author, but he talks about how we will go from one extreme to the other, and societies do it. Happens in the political
Yes.
spectrum but I kind of owned that. I got incredibly unhealthy, eating whatever I could. Sweets have always been, not so much candy, but just sweet, like cookies, chocolate chip cookies. A freaking weakness. It's terrible. Zero self-control. I did baked goods and ate cookies all the time, and would never turn down ice cream or any of that stuff. So sugar was my problem. Sweet tea, Chick-fil-A, all of that stuff. And so I had made the commitment and drew up the plan that for 30 days I wasn't going to do any of this stuff. And I ended up winning the Biggest Loser competition for most weight lost, but it took 5 more days for me to hit my goal. I wanted to get down to 200 in 30 days, and I couldn't do it, but I did it in 35. And I went from 235 pounds to 200 pounds.
Wow.
And the craziest part of it was I did the extreme calorie deficit. For 35 days, I was averaging somewhere between 800 and 900 calories a day. And I would never recommend anybody ever do that again, because now, after understanding what I did, it helped my, did I have mood swings? Absolutely. Did I have cravings? Yes. But they shifted and it was different. My experience was drastically different, but it had a whole lot more negative side effects than I would have ever realized. And so I don't ever recommend people do it the way that I did. Take it slower. It wrecked hormone levels. And, from a health and wellness perspective and mindset, your hormone levels play a huge role in all of it. And if you
Yes.
don't regularly keep up with that, monitor or take intentional steps to keep it at where you feel you're at your peak, I mean, it has so many terrible unintended
Yeah.
consequences. And it can, but it also, like, it brought me I hit my weight goal, but I like, again, wellness shift and mental shift. I remember looking at myself in the mirror at February 5th or 6th or so, and going, okay, well, I hit that goal. And then kind of like going, well, what the fuck now? What do I do?
Mhm.
And then at the same time having the next thought going, dude, I still feel like shit. All right, new goal, I guess. And that's kind of it. You have to, a lot of people don't realize that you got to, everybody, most everyone says set small goals, but you got to have something set up for the next one, or you got to scale it, right? The next one's got to be a little bit bigger, a little bit more, make it more fun, make it more exciting, make it more challenging, make it more adventurous, push the boundaries, test the limit in some way, shape, or form. And so I did. I was like, all right, the next one, I got to break 200 pounds. I got to get below 200 pounds, and I got to get to 190. But at the same time, I got to increase my cardio. I got to be able to run a mile faster. I hadn't run a mile since the Army. Hadn't run, and it was probably another 4 or 5 more months before I felt good enough where I could run without legitimate and like crippling pain or debilitating pain. And so, like, okay, and that's another thing. Like, know the difference between pain and being hurt, or I can't think of know the difference between being broken and a little bit of suffering, right?
Yeah.
Your muscles hurt, sometimes you can push it. That'll bring me to the next piece of that for sure. But know the difference, trust your body for sure, like, but at the same time, don't be afraid to push it a little bit and take the next
Mhm.
step and advance. Because I mean, one of my favorite people, David Goggins, mentions all the time, you really have no idea what your body is truly capable of until you really and aggressively start pushing it.
Now, I'm going to throw in the mind is just like that.
Oh
We
yeah,
have no
100%,
idea until we
100%.
definitely choose to move past that, right?
All right, for sure.
You shared with me that your grandfather was a perfect example for you of the importance of living with integrity.
Yeah,
And that's one of your big takeaways in life is living with integrity. And how does that show up in your work? How does that show up in your life? I mean, like for me, my experience with living with integrity is there's always a choice point, right?
sure.
Um, you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror. That's like, can I look myself in the mirror tomorrow? And when I was a teacher and caught a student cheating and knew it would be so easy just to dismiss it. And then I thought, well, gee,
Sure.
what happens when I get up in the morning and I look myself in the mirror tomorrow and I've lost all of my integrity as a teacher? So
Yeah.
I got to teach her the life lesson of cheating.
Yeah. That's so true. My grandfather had a saying, and how it came, or the first time I'm pretty sure the first time that I heard it was, I had I had just, as a kid, I think I was, I don't know, 11, maybe 12. Not quite a teenager yet. So still very young, stupid, and hormonal, all the usual things that we can kind of characterize around, teenagers, having moments like that. And so my parents were divorced, and at the time I was at my mom's, and I don't remember all of what I was angry for. I just remember what I did. And they were building a house behind our house. We would go and, we would run. We didn't have a fence at the time, but we would run back and forth and, all throughout, and we'd play hide and seek and stuff. And I remember going in there once and seeing a couple of cans of spray paint, orange, bright construction spray paint. And so I was mad about who knows what at the time. And I picked up one of those cans of spray paint and started spray painting the basement. And I wrote die. I drew stick figures. It was not good. It was vandalism. And I thought nobody would ever see it. And turns out one of my stepsisters at the time had saw me and, ratted me out, and good for her. She should have. She lived with integrity and did the right thing. And I was riding my bike and then came home, and I saw my dad's truck there, and I was like, why is he at my mom's house? And then I walked inside, and they're like, hey, sit down. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. And so, I got my lashing and stuff, the tongue lashing and stuff from my dad and my mom. And my mom had prepped a bucket of cleaning materials and a toothbrush. And she said, go clean it. And that was the end of it. Or so I thought. But my dad was very strategic in, if he needed a lesson to be taught, he would bring in backup, and he was really smart about this. I'm probably giving him more credit than he may deserve, or he may even accept at some point. But he had talked to my grandfather, and so there was nothing was said for the next week, maybe 2 weeks. I can't remember exactly. I think it was about a week. And so went back with my dad, and we're going down to the Lake of the Ozarks, and we're about halfway. We get to Kingdom City, and I've been quiet most of the time, not for any particular reason, but my dad chimes in and says, hey, by the way, got an hour and 10 or 15 minutes left of this car ride. And he's like, oh, by the way, you're going to have to tell grandpa what you did last weekend. And the psychological warfare that parents have to sometimes play with their kids. I'm sitting in the car now for the next hour and 20 minutes thinking about, I have to tell my grandfather what I just did. One, why? But two, I'm like, oh man. So we get there, and he comes out and meets us. And when you're a kid, when you're young like that, you want to avoid confrontation at all costs, and unless you're a bully or something like that. And that wasn't me. So I'm like, he says hi grandpa, and that was it. I'm being extra good. I'm carrying everything. I'm helping carry everything into the house, unpacking the truck and all that. And then my dad, right on cue, hey grandpa, he's got something to tell you. And then I was like, oh my God. And so we go out and sit in the back deck, and there's a few minutes of silence. And he says, so what is it that you need to tell me? And I break down a little bit, and grandpa vandalized the house right behind my mom's. And then he asked, what did you do? I spray painted the walls with, stuff. And he sits there. And again, the psychological warfare of this stuff. He sits there for a few minutes. And then I remember looking at him, because I couldn't look at his face. And, my grandfather meant so much to me. But I remember looking at his face, after a few minutes of silence, and I saw a tear run down just the side of his cheek. And then he looked at me and he said, young man, my little buddy, if you ever do that again, I will be the one to call the cops and make sure they take you away. And at 11 or 12 years old, I'm like, just terrified and mortified. I'm like, like every emotion is going through my head. And then he adds in there, look, man, I want you to understand this thing. you are never more than one decision away from doing the right thing. And that's the integrity piece of it. And he said, look, I know it was really hard for you to do this, but that was one step in the right direction. That hit me, and it's stuck with me ever since. And so, look, I'm human, and I still had my moments where I wasn't totally honest. And there's all sorts of ways that you can not be totally honest or be full of integrity. And I went through those phases of learning all that stuff, but it really shaped me, and it's something that I remind myself a lot. I still have to do that, right? If you're presented with an awkward situation or what is a shitty situation, nobody likes having to give bad news. Nobody likes
Mhm.
facing that uncomfortable situation. Nobody has like the majority of people, I should say, don't have a smile on their face when that time comes and they've got to do the hard thing. And so I do home loans for a living, and sometimes I have to give bad news, and hey, this isn't going to work out, or hey, there's a problem, or maybe it's something that's my fault, or somebody else's fault. And how do you take that balance, communicate effectively, where you're not pointing the finger at somebody else, you're not taking too much ownership, because I used to do that, and that's also a problem, right? Sometimes when you
Mhm.
take too much ownership of a problem that isn't even your fault, you look like you don't know what you're doing, or you look like you don't have much of a backbone, and you can't hold somebody else accountable. So there's all sorts of ways to handle it, and it takes time to learn those lessons and do that. But um, bad news gets worse the longer that you hold it. And um, a good friend taught me that, and several people have kind of reiterated that. But you're never more than one decision away from doing the right thing. And if you just keep it simple, right, just the littlest things, micro changes in your daily life, micro changes in the mindset. You don't have to do this big thing, right? Now, like, most people don't have to think about, hey, I spent 7 years in prison as a felon, and now I've got to go assimilate into the rest of the world. Look, your situation isn't as bleak as that. And for those who've had to experience something like that, there's still a path, there's still a way to do that and still get into society. But most people don't have to experience it that way. Like, no, keep it small, keep it simple. It's just one little thing that you got to change.
Right. And I mean, that brings me back to, I always think that's exactly the difference between me and somebody sitting in prison. We're one decision away, one decision away. I chose a
Yeah,
different decision at that point, that they chose the opposite decision. And there were
right.
consequences for them, and then there's consequences for me. I mean, good or bad, right?
100%.
And that's
100%.
just so very, very true, that everything in life, we are one decision point away from making that choice.
Hmm.
And sometimes those choices have severe consequences, and sometimes we think, "Phew, got away with that one that time." And then it comes back to bite us in the butt later, of course, because really, when
Absolutely.
you're in integrity, when you fall out of integrity, there's a lot of emotions, negative emotions, that go along with that we get to deal with. And
Sure.
the last thing that I want to talk about is one of your favorite words that one of your friends, I think it was an old mentor, taught you, that is my favorite word, and that's the word of curious. Be curious, not judgmental. And
Yeah.
I absolutely love, curiosity is my favorite word. And I think that it's my favorite word because, number one, I know what happens unconsciously when we approach things with curiosity. We give our unconscious mind permission to go out there in search of all the possibilities, right? It's like, that's what
Yeah.
opens our mindset, is the word curiosity. And I believe part of my personal journey is I gave that up long, long time ago when I was a little girl. Just unconsciously I did it, and the results showed up in my life, right? And now I'm like, oh yeah, I'm very curious. That's like my favorite word to express. because then all the creative things can show themselves. And I think you told me it was a mentor of yours that shared that with you.
Close. It was actually it was a movie or a TV show. It should be a TV show, but or yeah, it's a TV show that reminded me of it. And I kind of reiterated it. But a number of different mentors have mentioned, the common thing is keep an open mind. And when people say that is be open to change. And you hit the nail right on the head. More people are open to change when they're curious, right? There's a subconscious part of our mind, and then the science behind formulating new neural pathways within the mind, and broadening our knowledge, broadening our skills. The more curious we are, the easier it is for us to be able to build those skills, have different types of conversations. And so it really came up in for anybody, if you're looking for a new show and you haven't seen it, Ted Lasso is freaking phenomenal. There's a scene where they're playing darts, and or Ted Lasso is playing darts, and he brings up a quote as a kid, or that he saw years ago, and it's called "Be Curious, Not Judgmental." And it's by Walt Whitman, and he talks about if people would have bullies, they're not curious. They come up with this. They're just being judgmental, and they don't fully understand. And if they were curious, they would have asked questions. In there is had he asked questions, you probably would have asked, do you play darts? And he then proceeds to hit a couple of bullseyes and gets the right number of points to win the game. And the scene, the setting, everything about the build up from the character development to that episode, just the whole setting the stage, that lesson it hit one of those proverbial light bulbs in the brain. And lessons come full circle. And there are so many people, so many mentors in my life that had mentioned that and have said that, from parents. Hey, I went through a hardcore fundamentalist religion phase, and where it was less curious and more judgmental. And my dad was, my dad knew all of the right buttons to press to really provoke me and to challenge me. And every time that lesson was, look, it's fine, continue to study. And I did, but don't be so judgmental, because ultimately, isn't that God's job? And which is true. But yeah, that lesson is something that since then, that episode that really triggered it. And I've watched that show multiple times, and I love so many of the lessons in it. But that is a great connecting piece, with people like you who are also curious. But it's a renewed sense of self that you can take to and approach every new day with. And so, how can I be curious and not judgmental? And so if you wake up and say that, whoever you come across, I talk to new people almost every day. I see a lot of my network often every week. But all sorts of things are happening in different people's lives. And you're interested in psychology. I am, just as much as I am. We realize people love to talk about themselves. I think I've spent most of the time talking in this interview. But that's by design. In any case, a lot of people love to talk, and give them that opportunity sometimes. Some people think, oh, they're just being selfish. No. That oftentimes it's a cry for help if you don't realize it. If you're not paying attention to it, if you're not being open to it, be curious. What is it that they're trying to tell you? Right. What is it they're not telling you? Sometimes, so much of communication is nonverbal. or it can be, hey, they mentioned this, but maybe this is also a problem, or it could be a problem. Like it when you are curious and not judgmental, you just open yourself up to more opportunities. And more opportunities means more choices, more consequences, more rewards, more lessons, more failures, but more opportunities nonetheless. And I think that's what most people want to begin with, is more opportunities. And it's again so simple. Like, be curious, not judgmental, really sets the foundation. And then it's such a awesome lesson when you can learn that. I mean, I'm in my 30s, and my oldest is 10, and she's starting to get that. She's going through that phase where she's now starting to be able to pick up more of social cues, right? And understanding, as well as when they're kids. We tend to teach kids, especially early on, in more of a binary function, right or wrong, black and white, yes or no. And then we have to spend their teen years kind of reworking that, right? And man, the earlier on you can set that standard of, hey, just take a moment, and then ask questions back to them. And that's it's one of the most fun moments I have. Like, they can be wildly pissed off about something because I spent the time years ago teaching them right or wrong. It's yes or no, right or wrong, black and white. And then like a situation comes up where they're like, no, Dad, that's wrong. And I'm like, no, tell me why it's wrong. And they can't quite get there. And then you kind of have a smile on your face because you're trying to teach them a lesson or something. I could be a little arrogant sometimes, and kind of be the dad that's gotcha. And it can irritate them, but no, take the moment to, why? Be curious about it. Why do you think that is? Or if that was wrong, how would you like to tell somebody it's wrong? That really challenges the child. Oh man, I just had one too recently that really stuck out, because I pulled the same card. I can understand why you think that way, because that's what I taught you a couple of years ago. But I want you to just take a moment and think, is there any situation where that may actually be acceptable? And they had to think for a minute. And when you open that up and then initiate them to start asking questions, or more questions than just one, that's when you get to see their light bulb go off. And as a parent, when you get to see the light bulb go off for your kid, that is one of the most exciting things about life. And so like, just that lesson alone. And it hit home again last year. 31. I'm 32 now. I'll be 33 at the end of the year, but I'm 31, and I've got a 9-year-old at the time. Like, I've been parenting for a while now, for multiple kids, and there's a new approach. It's like the shiny new toy that you get as a kid. You become obsessed with it. And so anyway, this past year has been kind of like, it's been a bit of an obsession of mine to really hone in on that and take an extreme ownership position of that quote, of that mindset, and really use it and leverage it, especially when it comes to lessons and training and teaching my kids.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just 100% across the board. And that becoming a business owner about 6 years ago, that became my mantra, is be curious. And one of the things that positive intelligence reveals to us is that every single human on earth has a saboteur called judgment, or judger. And I hadn't ever really put it together in terms of curiosity and judgment together. That's a beautiful way to have a conversation about that, even with yourself. I'm really curious, why am I judging that person based on their appearance, let's just say? And when, as soon as you say curious, your unconscious mind, which is designed to serve and protect you, right? So it's ready to
Right.
serve you. Well, let me tell you why, because you have this experience and you maybe haven't learned the lessons to it yet and all the things, right? And then you go, ooh, well, now I could release that. That would be fair, right?
Hmm.
And just learn the lessons from it and move on. You know, I found that to be very, very effective. In terms of judgment, I've never really put that together, but I do really like that.
Yeah, 100%.
I really, really am excited to share your story, some of your story with you. And it's just been a real pleasure allowing you
Absolutely.
to share your story out there and some of your lessons in life and your three, you know, your three big takeaways to me is the importance of living with integrity and the that you're one step away from making a decision, good or bad, right? It's just you're
Right.
one decision away from that choice point. And then of course the be curious, not judgmental is always a great lesson for us. So I thank you, James, for joining us, and for our viewers, I look forward to connecting with James. You can connect with him on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, anything
Yep.
else?
Not yet. We've got a podcast coming up that I'm, continuing to build. That'll be out there in the future, and of course, we have already talked about this, so I'm looking forward to being able to have an interview with you as well. But yeah, those are the best places to find me.
Yeah, okay, great. And so speaking of your podcast, it's called Green Light Go, is that right?
It's part of that kind of initiative, but it's called I Love Perspective.
Oh, that's right.
And
Yes.
it'll be really geared around similar things that we just kind of talked about, life-changing events that have shaped your perspective and how you handle or interact with different situations. And everybody's flavor, everybody's tendencies are a little bit different. And the number of people, the guests that I've gotten commitments from already who are going to be on it, the scope and scale of those decisions and situations are really, I love them. And this is why I love talking to people so much, and being an extrovert is because I get to listen and be curious about all this stuff. And it's going to be a really neat opportunity to kind of pick people's brains on a deeper level for some of this stuff, and then be able to share that, because
Right.
I don't think people realize how many others are really struggling with the things that they are, as well as
Mhm.
maybe it's a slightly different take on it,
Right.
a slightly different spin on the situation, or maybe it's one word that, or a new phrase that turns that light bulb on, that kind of shift your mindset in a different direction. The micro changes, again, all over the place, are so helpful, and I'm really looking forward to that opportunity.
Yeah,
So
that'll be fabulous. It happens to be one of my favorite subjects to talk about, especially from
yeah,
the understanding the science behind all of that. It is so much fun and also opens the door for growth mindset and shifting of perspective. And even not even shifting your perspective in the sense of, well, I don't have to change my mind just because somebody else has a different opinion, respecting it, respecting the perspective of others. You know, I think that that's always a really great opportunity for us to grow as a humanity, right? So I look
absolutely.
forward to hearing that.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, because you're absolutely right. The respect for others and people's opinions. I mean, we see it in the news all the time, especially on the politics side. Like, um, you know, no matter which side of it you're on, it's always framed in a black and white, good versus evil kind of concept, and it's mind numbing. And like, eventually it gets to a point when you listen to it long enough, it gets to you kind of become entertained by it on some topics or some levels. Like, it makes you scratch your head, and then some levels it does fire you up, and it should, um because they're the things that you're passionate about. But yeah, the respect piece is huge, and I'm hoping to be able to contribute and helping others do that. And that's as well as grow myself in that regard, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
I came
100%.
from a super judgmental kind of mindset, and being able to sit down and respect somebody else's opinion or story or what have you, the whatever it is that has shaped their life to have that opinion or have that outlook on life, being able to understand it makes it easier to then respect them, even if you may not agree with it. And so that's
Right.
that's definitely a big focus point for
Yep, I
sure.
so agree with you. Well, I look forward to checking that out and being a part of it and just helping be a part of impacting the world. That's what both of our goals are, is to impact the world in a way that people can step into more empowerment of who they are, and then they can contribute, right, to humanity in a more
Exactly.
powerful and impactful way. So, well, James, thank you so much.
Exactly.
I am super excited to share you out with my sphere of influence, and I will talk to you later, and I look forward to all the great things that are ahead for you.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here with you, and thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.